Hello, guys, and welcome back. So, in this section, we'll talk about how two components can interact with each other. Initially, in this section, we'll just talk about the parent-child relationship and not the sibling relationship. Once we are done with services and how can we use shared services amongst multiple components, then we'll talk about another way of interaction between two sibling components. Okay, so let's in this section talk about sharing data or interaction between two components that belong to a parent-child relationship. Okay, so let's say I have two components in here, parent and child. Nothing as such in here as of now. Okay, so let's say in my parent component, I have a counter property that is a number. Okay, let's initialize it to 0, and now I have two buttons inside my child component. Okay, one would be an increment button, the other one would be decrement. Okay, and I want to do something when the user clicks on these buttons. So I'll use event bindings for that purpose. On decrement. Okay, so I have two buttons. On the click of these buttons, I have called on increment and on decrement methods respectively, and in the on increment and on decrement method that I'm going to define here, I'm going to do something. Okay, all right, now let's say that this child component has an input property. Now we are aware about the input property, right? We have already discussed about this. So say this as an input property of, say, count. Okay, this would again be a number, and I'll just import input from core. Okay, now let's say I use an h1 tag. Okay, and I'll print the current count here. Okay, so I'll need something here, so I'll just give it. I'll just think about what I want to show here. Okay, and now in here I'm using the child component. Okay, this child component will take an input. Okay, what was the name of this input? The name of this input was count. Okay, and this count was the counter property that we had here. Let's save this. Okay, let's go back to the view now. All right, so we have two buttons, increment and decrement. Nothing is happening once I click these buttons as of now. Okay, so the main idea here is that if, say, I click on the increment button that is present inside my child component, this value, the counter value, gets updated here. Okay, and vice versa. So if I click the decrement button, the counter property that we have here in the parent component gets decremented. Okay, so how exactly can we do that? This can be done with the help of some component interaction methods that we can use. Okay, so we have already seen one of them, that is the view child. Okay, essentially what we want is we want the value of this counter property. So on increment, say if I increment this by 1, and on the click of the decrement button I decrement it by 1. Okay, so essentially what I want is the value of this property whenever there is a change in it. Okay, how can I do that? The first way is to use the viewChild decorator. We have already seen what viewChild decorator does, right? If I have a child component in the template of a parent component, then I can have access to that child component and every method or property that is defined on it using the viewChild decorator. Okay, so I'll use it. I've imported it from Angular core. I'll use it to say create a child component instance. Okay, this would be child, and which would be of type child component. Okay, and I've already imported this, so I'll get rid of the first line and I'll paste it here. Okay, now generally view child should be accessed only inside ng after view init. We have already seen this, and this should be the method that is defined once we implement after view init interface. Okay, I'll just cut it from here, paste it here so that we import it from Angular core and not the whole and we don't specify the whole path in here. Okay, and now in this case we can do something like this dot child dot. Now we have access to all these properties, right? So I can get the count, the current count here. Okay, and I don't really need this counter right here as such then in that case. Okay, if I have access to the count directly, I don't really need that counter anymore. Okay, so let's say we get rid of this. Okay, and it has a counter property and we need to have access to it. So in this case, we can simply get access to the counter property of that child by using child.count, and child is something that we have used as a content child in here. Okay, so I guess that would be all. So I don't really need this ng after view init as well. Okay, all right, so let's save this and let's quickly check. I can simply use this as count and that should be it. Okay, so let's check this. Let's initialize this to 0 so that at least we see something over here. Okay, now if I click on increment, I'll see that this counter gets incremented. If I click on decrement, I see that this counter gets decremented. Okay, now if you realize what's happening here is we are having access to a child property inside my parent property, or inside we are having access to a child property inside my parent component by the use of viewChild. Okay, so that was one way of doing this. Now there is another way of doing this in which we'll be able to know the value of counter. Okay, so suppose if I didn't wanted to use viewChild, what exactly can be done in that case? Well, the child can notify the parent when something is done by the use of event emitters. Okay, so now say if this is a, let's consider this as a child component. Okay, and we are binding to the click event of it, right? So on the similar terms, we can have an event from the child that I can listen to in here. Okay, so let's say counter changed is the name of that event. Okay, and to listen to that or to handle that event, I'm going to call a method on my parent component. I'll name this on counter changed. Okay, and this will get an event. Okay, this particular keyword right here, dollar event, is quite necessary. If you change this to any other name, say EV or simply E, in most of the cases it doesn't work. Okay, so it's always recommended to use the dollar event name as the name of the parameter that you would be receiving. Okay, let's save this, and now in my parent component I'll define a method, and this will give me the value of the counter. So in that case I'll have to create a counter property here that would be of type number, and then I can assign this dot counter equal to dollar event. Okay, now I have I'm listening to the event counter changed, but there isn't any event defined in here, okay, that I can listen to. And this event right here is something that should be present on the child component, right? So I'll create this event on the child component. Okay, this would be of type event emitter that I'd be importing not from Selenium-WebDriver but from Angular core itself. Okay, now this would be of type number because we are expecting to send the count variable's value itself. Okay, and I'll assign it to, or I'll new up a new instance of event emitter which would be of generic type number, like so. Okay, now on increment or on decrement, I'll call the emit method on this event emitter and pass it the count. This dot count I must say or specify. Okay, or I can simply cut short this by doing something like plus plus count. Okay, so it will first increment the value and then it would send it to or then it would emit it. Okay, on the similar lines I can do something like this in here. Okay, and now let's save this and let's see what's happening. Okay, so it looks like I'm getting errors. Let's see what the errors are. So it says that first it cannot read the count property of undefined. Why is that? Let's check. All right, yeah, so child.count is nothing because child is nothing, so the value is now the value of the counter will now be available in the counter property that we have defined on the parent. Okay, all right, so if I click on increment, nothing is happening. Okay, and I'm also not getting that counter here. Why is that? That is because I have the event emitter here, but Angular doesn't know that there is an event that I can listen to, or there is an event on the child that I can listen to in the parent in this template here. Okay, so to make Angular realize that there is there is an event on the child component that the parent can listen to, I'll have to decorate this particular event with an output property. Okay, now output property is something that I'll have to import from Angular core again. Okay, all right, now let's save this, and if I click on increment I get 1 and I get the value of it. Okay, works fine. All right, So this is how you can use view child and things like output properties for interacting your parent and child components with each other. Okay, and once we have a look at services and observables and all these other concepts, then we'll also have a look at another method in which you can use um, behavior subjects or simply subjects inside services to share data between two components and let them interact with each other. Okay, so in the next section now we'll have a discussion on change detection mechanism that is used by Angular. So I'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot.